the editor of Esopus and the president of the Esopus Foundation. Some of you may already be aware that exactly 1 year today, May 6th, 2020, Michelle and I had scheduled what we were planning to be a pretty lavish party at the MoMA archives to celebrate the launch of the book, Modern Artifacts. Of course, those plans were scotched by COVID, but she and I both felt it was appropriate to do something later rather than anytime, albeit remotely. And that's what we're doing tonight. We're celebrating the publication of the book exactly 1 year after that original launch party date. So Michelle and I are going to go into depth on the book and the series in Esopus that originally inspired it in the next 45 minutes or so. And we really hope you'll have questions for us at the end of the presentation. But first, let me introduce my partner in this whole venture, Michelle Elligott, the esteemed Chief of Archives, Library, and Research Collections at the Museum of Modern Art. Michelle.
Thank you so much, Todd. It's such a pleasure to be here with you tonight, even if it is just virtually in the Zoomosphere, which we're all very comfortable inhabiting, I think, these days. Before we dive into the formal presentation, I did want to mention that this book is in fact dedicated to the memory of Werner Kramarski, a longtime trustee at MoMA and a founding member of our trustee committee on archives, library, and research. Wynn was a generous supporter and enthusiast of our activities in the MoMA archives. And as Todd and I discovered over the years, Wynn was also actually one of the great connections that we both shared.
Yeah, Wynn supported Esopus from the very beginning, and he almost never missed an event of ours, even in later years when it was a challenge for him health-wise to attend these. This is a picture of him, the three of us actually, at the launch of Esopus 23 at the archives at MoMA in 2016.
And speaking of the archives at MoMA, I'd just like to give you a brief overview. I don't know if you know, but we're located on the MoMA campus itself on the 6th floor of the Coleman building, which is on the east side of the sculpture garden, or basically right where you see that terrace under that large overhang. Formally founded in 1989 as the repository for the institution's historical records, the archives has subsequently expanded to collect materials created outside of the institution. In 2012, we also founded the MoMA PS1 archives as part of our program, thanks to leadership support from the Leon Levy Foundation. And to date, we estimate we have some 6.5 million items, ranging from staff correspondence and memoranda, scrapbooks, press clippings, exhibition records, curatorial research files, photographs, audio and video recordings, and oral histories. Some notable collections of private archives that we hold include the Paul Rosenberg Gallery Archives, the Calvin Tompkins Papers, the Silverman Fluxus Archives, and the Avalanche Magazine Archive. The archives are used by researchers from around the world, from students to scholars, a few of whom you see there in our reading room. And they increasingly form part of the museum's collection displays. Here you see a gallery currently installed devoted to the subject of Frank O'Hara. We're also featured in other exhibitions as well as special events that occur at MoMA, including this very popular artist member open house program we did in the archives itself for living contemporary artists.
As most of you probably already know, I founded Esopus in 2003 with a very simple goal. I wanted to create an unmediated space in which artists and other creative professionals could connect directly with the general public. The idea was to create an affordable and attractive magazine, really a limited edition artwork disguised as a magazine, that would be distributed widely to newsstands, bookstores, and libraries at an affordable price. In order to make this possible, I created a nonprofit foundation and depended on support from institutions like the Warhol Foundation, the NEA, not to mention many generous individuals like Wynn, for instance, to help the magazine bridge the gap between its very modest revenue and its expenses. Unmediated meant, most of all, no advertising, which suddenly freed up quite a bit of real estate in every issue, pages that were normally reserved for high-dollar advertisements, such as page 1. That now could be used as a way to feature artists and artist projects by people like Ed Ruscha, Micheline Thomas, and also Marilyn Minter. But each issue of Esopus also featured work across a range of disciplines, including filmmakers like Charles Burnett. There are stills from his film Killer of Sheep, shown here from Esopus 12. Christopher Wheeldon, the New York City Ballet choreographer, shown here from Esopus 2. And New York Times cruciverbalist David Quarfoot, who walked Esopus readers through the creation of a crossword puzzle from scratch in Esopus 9. Each issue of Esopus ended with a CD of new music created according to a particular theme, like in Esopus 4, shown here, songs based on descriptions of imaginary friends submitted by Esopus subscribers. I've always been fascinated and frankly a little obsessed with archives and archival material, and I tried in every issue to feature items from both personal collections and in many cases institutions like the New York Public Library, such as these notebooks found in the Nabokov papers in the library's research collections. So, of course, it was with that archival lust in mind that I invited Mylan Houston, who was then the chief of library at MoMA, for a lunch back in 2006, which I asked him if there might be some way to feature some of the treasures of MoMA's archives in Esopus. He quickly made the introduction to Michelle, and not long after, we were on our way with modern artifacts. When we first decided to work together in a series, my question to Michelle was, what should we do first?
And I said, well, Todd, that's easy. It's obvious that we all know what the very first choice should be. So many students of modern art history know very well this chart, Alfred Barr's iconic and canonical chart of Cubism and abstract art. Indeed, largely because of this chart, 20th century art history was taught in a certain way, with the various isms mixing and evolving into other isms. Well, from our perspective today, we actually embrace the fact that we understand there's a more complicated, intersecting set of narratives about modern art history. The impact of the chart at the time of its creation in 1936 and subsequent decades cannot be overstated. Now, that said, something I found so remarkable was that while the chart had this sense of authority and finality, what I found in Barr's papers was actually something else altogether. In fact, we have over 12 drafts of this chart in the archives, and what is so wonderful is that they prove that Barr had been tinkering with this genealogy of modern art for over a decade. The drafts exhibit some of the thinking and process that went into it, with erasures, redirects, edits, etc. And I love the example you see here, as it identifies the specific artists that Barr was thinking about, while the final version deletes this information for visual graphic clarity.
This first installment was so successful and the reaction was so positive that I immediately proposed to Michelle that we do a modern artifacts in every issue. This was a site I look forward to every 6 months or so at the beginning, to seeing whenever I walked into the room, the modern artifacts, into the Museum of Modern Art Archives reading room. I would be putting together a new issue of the magazine, and I would show up and Michelle would have already assembled material, meticulously organized, of course, representing a range of topics she might have already run by me as possibilities. My feeling upon entering the archives always, for every one of these planned meetings, was similar to the anticipation I felt as a young boy about to open his presents on a birthday. We would delve into these treasures together and then decide on one for the next issue. We were very lucky to have the support of the incredible staff of reproduction services at MoMA to do the bulk of scanning and photography. But occasionally we just put our heads together, or in this particular case, our fingers, to photographed images, like this spread from an exhibition binder for Spaces, the exhibition at MoMA, that would later appear in print after some cleanup work in Photoshop.
I always like to say that Todd was an enabler in the very best sense of the word. We would get together and just toss around ideas. Often these could be obscure facts, forgotten narratives, or untold stories that I had encountered in the extraordinarily varied and deep archival collections. I just blurt out sometimes some of my favorite finds. These could be as diverse as the museum's exhibition of Italian Renaissance masterpieces in 1940. Of course, the only place one could have seen Botticelli's Birth of Venus in New York was at the Museum of Modern Art. Or artist Scott Burton's scores for his early performance works and documentary photos of them. Or Spaces, which you see here, the landmark show by Jenny Licht that introduced the museum to installation art. But now let's talk about just a few of them in a little more depth. So I have to say one topic that was unavoidable because it was always everyone's favorite whenever I give VIP tours is MoMA's first guest book. You're seeing an image of it here, and gosh, don't you just wish we still had something like this today? Look at, I just love the fanciful handwriting of these grand autographs. And what we're showing you here is my favorite spread. These 2 pages date from 1931 to 1935. So this argues that this tome was clearly only brought out for the VIPs of the VIPs, if you will. It certainly wasn't just left at the front desk, in the lobby for anyone to sign in. You can quickly understand that it was a who's who of the art world at the time. And also I want to remind you that at this point, the museum is only 5 years old. So what you're seeing, some select signatures on these 2 pages, reading from top to bottom, left to right, you have Fernand Léger, Julian Levy, Diego Rivera halfway down on the left, George Gershwin, Jean Charlotte at the top right, Henri Matisse, Gershwin again, Sarah Delano Roosevelt, Salvador Dali, and the second from the bottom, very scratchy signature at the right, is Albert Einstein, just a year after arriving in this country. Mm-hmm. And the last page features even wonderful movie and theater stars, such as Betty Davis and Molly Picon.
I had mentioned to Michelle earlier on my interest in featuring multidisciplinary work in Esopus. And when I mentioned this idea to her to see if there might be something we could present from the archives and featured audio, she had a really great idea.
Well, certainly one thing immediately sprung to mind. And that is why this museum is a citadel of civilization. Well, I know you're all laughing out there, even though I can't hear you. That's my pretty bad impersonation of President Franklin D. Roosevelt's radio address to the nation on the occasion of the museum's 10th anniversary, a copy of which was included on a CD in the issue of the magazine. Now, the president used the occasion in May of 1939 to highlight the importance of democracy at a time when repressive regimes were gaining ground in Europe. Roosevelt stated that the museum's goals of promoting the arts equated with maintaining peace. And he asserted that only with peace and individual freedom that democracy enables would the arts be able to thrive and flourish, and thus his affirmation of the museum's role. Broadcast from the White House, the radio show actually coincided with the live on-site opening of the new flagship Goodwin Stone building, which remains the heart of our campus today. Now, on the lighter side of affairs, it was presumably a pretty great party. You can see on the right here, the gentleman in black tie, of course, literally holding a radio to listen to the radio program while in the galleries. And dinner actually had already been served earlier in the evening. Artist Alexander Calder was commissioned to design these elegant candelabra that grace the center of the long dining table, which you see in a photograph on the left there. And here's a fun fact. These candelabra are actually included in our current Calder exhibition. So they are on view right now, the first time they've seen the light of day since that 1939 dinner. So I encourage you to come visit us in Midtown and take a look yourself. And speaking of dinner, yes, for those inquiring minds, I can tell you what was served. I can confirm the menu. It did include stuffed alligator pear or avocado, green turtle soup, and guinea hen.
One of the things I learned from Michelle about MoMA patrons is that they just didn't go to fancy parties. They actually took an unusually active role in museum programming and development and even outreach.
That's right, Todd. In 2 other articles, we dug into the history of the museum's Junior Council and Art Lending Service. The Junior Council was founded in 1949, according to its first chair, Blanchette Hooker Rockefeller, quote, to bring together a group of younger people who have a common interest in the arts and a desire to see them fostered soundly and liberally in this country. Or, as Barbara Jacobson has more recently put it, quote, to get all these young Turks contained and out of Alfred Barr's hair and not meddling around in what he was doing. The group, which is a forerunner of the current day Contemporary Arts Council, was unique in that it was not just a patronage group, but one in which the members had to volunteer and work on activities and programs at the museum. Perhaps the most radical of which was the art lending service. There we go, which was created in 1951. Any member was eligible to rent works of art for a period of a few months with an option to renew. The fees were modest, and if in the end one decided to purchase the work, the rental fee was applied towards the sale price. The art lending service carried work by Dion Arbus, Jasper Johns, Joan Miro, Jackson Pollock, to name a few. And to be clear, these were not works from the museum collection, but rather on consignment from dealers or artists directly. Basically, the point of the initiative was to cultivate a collector base of modern art, something which was fledgling at that time, though I know from today's perspective, that's pretty hard to believe. This service was actually shuttered in 1982 because by that time it was no longer deemed relevant with the burgeoning growth of the art world as we know it today. So I'd also like to briefly share with you a few of the more adventurous projects of the Junior Council, which really took an active and integrated role in the life of the museum. It ran the museum's highly acclaimed poetry reading series beginning as early as 1950, which you see here. It also engaged in avant-garde live and performing arts programming. And as a reminder, at that time in the 1960s and 70s, there was no curatorial department or program dedicated to such events. Their programs included video installations, performance art, theater, dance, and music, basically laying the foundation for the current Department of Media and Performance. They also undertook programming for high school and college students, collaborated on a prison arts program, and worked with the 121st Street Project for Public Art, which you see here. And they also created the museum's holiday cards program.
So as you'll notice here, this iconic Robert Indiana card is presented as a removable facsimile. This is something I tried to do with almost every installment of Modern Artifacts in the magazine. The idea was to approximate the feeling of discovering and handling these actual objects in a visit to the archive, with the added bonus that you can take them home with you. About every 5th issue, I would decide to devote the entire publication to a particular theme, ranging from black and white, this was to save costs after the financial collapse in 2008, to the creative process. Every time I gave Michelle the new theme, I had to say I wondered if she would be able to come up with something from the archive that worked, and of course, she always did.
Well, I love a challenge, but I have to say a fun one was issue number 13. I thought, ooh, unlucky 13, sinister. And I thought, well, actually, we actually hit the jackpot with this one because you may not know, but from day one, all MoMA exhibitions have been numbered sequentially. And it just so happens that exhibition number 13 happened to be our 1931 Matisse retrospective, the first solo exhibition arranged by the museum and the artist's first major exhibition in the United States. So we know that Matisse was actually very pleased with the show, though he didn't come to visit it in person. He did see the installation photographs, such as the ones you're viewing here on the left, which prompted the artist in a letter to acknowledge that it was a perfect hang or installation. Now, Barr, of course, wrote an exhibition catalog, which you see here, and sent 2 copies to Matisse, which the artist then sent back to Barr and to his wife, Marga, with these beautiful drawings and inscriptions. And the one to Alfred reads, "In memory of an ensemble of which the harmony was born of a common comprehension or understanding." I just love that. It makes me believe that Matisse is as much a poet as a great visual artist. So then Tod gave me another thematic challenge. He said, don't worry, Michelle. It's okay. If you can't deliver on this one, you can just pass. But I have to tell you, the topic is television. And instantaneously, I said, no problem. For, in fact, the museum embraced television from its earliest days and actually ran a formal television project in mid-century. And we're not going to take time to go into that tonight, but what you're seeing here is actually a picture of Alfred Barr and Nelson Rockefeller at NBC Studios to do a filming of a television program very early in 1939.
I finally thought I would stump Michelle with our medicine issue. I dared her to come up with something that fit into this theme.
Yeah, and yeah, that was a dare. And I'm not going to lie to you, Todd, when you gave me this one, I thought you had actually triumphed. I wasn't sure I could find a topic within MoMA archives that was going to hit the nail on this theme. So I had to think about it for days, if not weeks. I was dodging your calls, I think, at that time. So my initial thought was to scout the history of our Department of Architecture to see if they had ever done an exhibition devoted to hospital architecture, but alas, they had not, to no avail. So then I came back to Todd and I said, how far could we stretch the concept of medicine? Because I went on to explain that during and after World War II, the museum ran an armed services program, and a major component of that was to provide art therapy as a means to help war veterans recover from both physical and mental injury. The program included occupational or physical art therapy, such as modeling or clay weaving, like modeling clay or weaving, as well as creative therapy, if you will, where painting, drawing, sculpture was employed to improve soldiers' psychological state and help with what we now refer to as PTSD.
So Esopus ceased publication in 2018, which probably most of you know. And when that happened, Michelle and I started immediately thinking about creating a volume compiling all 18 modern artifacts installments. Since many of the issues have been sold out already, frankly, I wanted an excuse to work with Michelle again. And we decided early on, if we were going to do this, we were going to invite 6 contemporary artists to create projects related to a particular aspect of the archive, which could then be interspersed throughout the book with these 18 installments. The 6 artists were Clifford Owens, who is pictured here in the archive stacks, Mary Ellen Carroll in the middle here, and Rhea Karam, I think, is on the call tonight. Hi, Rhea. They're here with Michelle in the archives reading room, exploring potential topics for their projects. Here's a slide of Mary Lum's project, including a removable insert consisting of juxtaposed slices from documents related to the 1961 MoMA exhibition, The Art of Assemblage. And Paul Ramirez Jonas created a pretty brilliant timeline called MoMA and Dada, or Dada, that intertwined MoMA's history with the history of his parents, which was a really wonderful, light and fun project.
And I love this aspect of the book because I've always been adamant that archives are not just about the past.
Right.
They continue, they inform, and they are relevant to our present and help us to think about how we wish to envision our future. Not to mention that archives have also become a major source of inspiration and a medium for scores of contemporary artists. So what we're showing you here, the project that resonates most with me is that of Michael Rakowitz, who literally took a historical document from the archives, updated and contextualized it to the world today, and workshopped it with collaborating artists from Amman, Jordan, to create a lecture performance discussing the political and cultural crises in the Middle East. The source for his inspiration brings us back to one of our favorite installments in the series, first featured in Esopus 9. Now, I have to tell you, you should have seen the look on Todd's face when I told him about Exhibition X, the museum's top secret and confidential exhibition to fight fascism. Could we have the next slide, please? The only thing was, it was never realized, forgotten to history. Its secrets were locked away within this small box in the archives. It was the summer of 1940, Paris had just fallen to Hitler, and Mussolini had agreed to join the Axis powers, and the United States was still in its isolationist stance. The museum basically said to itself, this is a very serious situation. We cannot let fascist regimes take over the world. So its approach was, as a museum, it thought of itself as a purveyor of ideas and not arms. So it thought, how could it incentivize the American public to stand up and fight for the ideals of democracy and freedom of expression? So as a museum, the answer was clear: through an exhibition. The proposed show, which was to be titled For Us the Living, was basically a propaganda show that was to be achieved through a multimedia extravaganza. It was going to be this physically immense, immersive exhibition at the Museum of Modern Art that was going to have no art per se. The museum visitors, for example, were to traverse a series of rooms with dynamic multimedia presentations that unfolded in scenes titled The Avenue of Totalism, the Avenue of American Character and History, the Citizen's Responsibility. For example, the former gallery contained a portrait of Adolf Hitler at the end of the room and mechanized dummies on either side against the walls that would spin and salute Hitler as the viewer passed by. And you're seeing a drawing for that gallery on the left. The latter gallery, octagonal in shape, included a booming audio track upon entry questioned, who is it who has allowed this to happen? The room is illuminated by a spotlight overhead. The lights switch off and a harsh light would come back on, flooding the viewers, confronted with their own reflections as the voice intoned, "It is you who have neglected your duties." So if that doesn't spur someone to act to defend democracy, I don't know what would.
And, Michelle, I have to ask, this never happened. This exhibition never actually came to pass. But it feels like something that could be maybe useful even today in some level, perhaps.
Indeed.
I have to say that the chance to publish these materials, in particular for the first time in Esopus, was a truly remarkable opportunity. But I feel that way about every installment of Modern Artifacts that we worked on together. To have the opportunity to explore and share this collection of materials that play such an essential role in the history and development of modern art has been a gift and an absolute privilege.
Well, and as you know, there is nothing more that I love than mining, sharing, and promoting the great gems and jewels and the great depth of the MoMA archives. And Tod, I count our professional collaboration as one of the highlights of my career, and I'm so appreciative for the opportunity to create this book together. So I thank you.
Thank you, Michelle. Listen, we're going to open this up for questions, and I think probably the best way to do that is to, if you can, to raise your hand in the reactions tab at the bottom of the screen. You can also put questions into the chat area, and we can get them that way. And if you're unable to get us that way, then I would say wave your hands and we'll try to find you in that manner. But if any questions are ready, let's go. We're ready to hear. Oh, how did the Great Depression affect the museum? That's a great question. That's a Great Depression, great question.
Sorry, give me a moment. I'm just adjusting my screen.
That's a chat. Yeah, that's a chat.
Yeah.
Yep.
It is an excellent question. So, as many of you are probably aware, the museum opens in 1929, November 8th. So literally days into the beginning of the Depression. I can tell you that the museum had one of its founders, Lily Bliss, left a bequest of her art collection to the museum. And unfortunately, she died quite early in the life of the institution in 1931. And one of the requirements for accepting the collection was that the museum had to raise a certain amount of money to endow for the care of the collection. And I can tell you that as a result of the Depression, the estate of Bliss allowed the museum to accept the art collection, even without being able to fully fundraise the amount that had originally been agreed upon. The institution, I should say, in addition to Bliss, the other main founders were Mary Quinn Sullivan and, of course, Abby Aldrich Rockefeller. And I think that the institution would not have been able to make it through the Depression were it not for Abby Rockefeller and her largesse. Furthermore, I know that internally there was a lot of talk about the mission of the institution, not just to promote modern art, but also to be a place to welcome citizens of New York City to come in and sort of a respite from the trials of day-to-day life. And at that time, there were no admission fees for precisely these reasons.
I'm just, I read a comment from Judith Sobel, menu misspells museum. I noticed that too when we were putting together the issue, and it was everything I could barely stand not to fix it as an editor. You noticed that, right, Michelle? The menu for the dinner with the FDR address, museum is spelled museum.
You want to?
Yeah.
Hilarious. I never even noticed.
It really was.
I was so fixated on the dinner items, I guess. I was distracted.
Anybody have any favorites? Any favorite installments? Any favorite chapters from the book? We'd love to hear about them. We only
One raised hand.
Oh yeah. Please.
Louis.
Oh, hi.
Louis.
Yeah.
Everybody. Hi.
Hi, Todd.
How are you?
Great. This is fascinating. And one thing that's often written about is the role that the museum played in the Cold War, in cultural diplomacy. And I wonder, just from an archival point of view, what you've learned about that, and what we should know about that part of the history.
I'm just going to quickly interject, Michelle. You may know that Mr. Manon just wrote a very, very highly acclaimed book about Cold War art and culture. So he's the perfect person to ask this question.
Well, and I dare say he might be the perfect person to answer this question as well, from my point of view. But no, it's a fascinating topic. So let me introduce, for the rest of the people on the call, the notion that the museum in 1952 created a formalized international program whereby the museum organized exhibitions basically for export around the world. And, this is the time of the ascendance and triumph, if you will, the terminology from the time of American, abstract expressionist painting, and the equivalence of that sort of art style with democracy, freedom of expression, and by promoting arts of that genre to places around the world, particularly, for example, in the Eastern Bloc, Eastern Europe, was a way to promote, soft diplomacy for U.S. democratic ideals. There has been a lot written about this subject, and considerations of to what extent was the museum involved in just cultural politics, or what were there formal ties with U.S. government agencies to work on these efforts. But certainly the international program was pivotal to enhancing these exchanges internationally.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah. I think the museum stepped in because the State Department didn't want to deal with controversy over the kind of art that the United States was sending abroad.
Mm-hmm.
But just my only other thought is just that I think the policy of the American government was to promote the idea that a diversity of artistic styles was possible in the US rather than one official style.
That is true. Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
Thank you for underscoring that.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Luke. I've got a question from Judith. What are plans for Esopus for the near future? Well, for the near future, not much, honestly. We ceased publication in 2018, and we did a couple of books, one with the artist Neil Goldberg, who I think may be on the call as well. And then we did Modern Artifacts. And the plan for 2020 was to do a distribution program and also an educational program. And obviously, both of those went absolutely nowhere once March hit and the COVID pandemic took hold. So we're kind of recalibrating. We're thinking more about, certainly the main goal right now for us in the near future is to get as many copies of back issues of Esopus into underserved libraries as possible. So we've got a program where we've distributed, I think, 50 sets of copies to the New York Public Library for branches there, to the Brooklyn Public Library, to the Mississippi Public Library system, the Vermont system. And that's an ongoing effort, which is not as easy as you would think to pull off, but we're making it happen slowly but surely. Our archives went to Colby College. They were acquired by Colby in 2019. So that's also something that's kind of been put on hold, unfortunately, with the pandemic. But I think probably in the coming year, there will be some beginnings of collaborations with them, possibly exhibitions, certainly workshops, maybe lectures, et cetera, et cetera. And then, once we have a better sense of where we're going economically with fundraising and everything else, we'll probably jump back into publications of some sort. So thanks for the question, Judith. Oh, more questions.
Yeah. Let me just say to
that's great.
To Leah Levy, yes, the New American Painting, that is one of these, that's the 1958 traveling exhibition. So it was indeed a fantastic show. Todd, would you like to take the NFT question?
Oh my God. I feel so desperately unqualified to answer this, but I will say my 30,000 foot high take on this is that they are going to, as someone who's very has a complicated relationship with the art world and with the market that runs the art world, they could be very interesting in that I think they're kind of bringing to the forefront the idea of value and how things are valued. And I think that could be problematic particularly for contemporary art. It could also be very productive and interesting for contemporary art. I'm not quite sure where it's going to go, but I think it's a wait and see kind of a thing right now. It seemed like it was very promising at first, and then there have been quite a few naysayers in the art world who have suggested that it's just one more way for rich people to make more money and for artists to be basically exploited once again. Hopefully that's not the case. That's please, Michelle.
Oh, I'll pass. I think you did a great job. What I'll do instead is I can pick up the next one, which is from Janice Ekdahl, our wonderful former chief librarian here at MoMA. And she's asking, how are we continuing to collect material documenting MoMA's history? So as you might imagine, Todd, if we wanted to do this book again a few decades from now, it would have to take on a very different format if we wanted to be dealing with our current moment, because mostly at this time we are collecting documentation that has been, it's born digital, right? And so we have created an electronic record archive program here at the institution. We're using a third-party system called Preservica, which is actually increasingly being used by museums throughout this country, as well as some federal governments in Europe. And we are training our curators how to, collect, organize their email, their, database output checklists, data sets, et cetera, and upload all of them to this centralized cloud-based archive. So we are still doing it, Janice. We still have records management schedules, for each department. We collect the curators' exhibition records, their research, their correspondence, documentation about acquisitions. From the educators, we collect records about the programs they're doing with the general public. From the communications office, we collect every single press release and every single article that's printed and collected by our press aggregating agency. But it's all coming to us as, bits and bytes or zeros and ones and going into a database. So Todd, I challenge you how to think about designing a beautiful book with those materials.
Well,
maybe we'll make an NFT.
Maybe so. This was the heaviest publication we ever produced, and it does make me think perhaps there would be some advantage to doing something a little more in the digital realm, because it's very Esopus is all very heavy too. It's expensive to send, and it's cumbersome to store. But what can I say? I love print. Any other questions? Oh, there's a raised hand from Jeff Malmberg. Hi, Jeff.
Hey, Todd. Thank you for this. It's so interesting. And, I've had this book for about a year, and I pick it up, and it's so much fun to kind of fall into, and in the same way Esopus was, but almost, somehow more so. And, it occurred to me today, and maybe this is entirely obvious, but, with these boxes, it's almost like this very ordered box, that has this world inside of it. And I guess I'm wondering how much your experience at MoMA informed the aesthetic of Esopus as it grew, because these boxes must be this explosion and overwhelming sense for you when you dig into them, right?
Wow, what a great question. I said early on that archives always inspired me and got me incredibly excited. And I think, I felt like less of a designer and more of an arranger of items. And I think with the MoMA archives in particular, we did a lot of photography of every single item, and I would do setup shots as well to save money usually and to be able to do more. But the idea was literally to take all these separate things and put them back together digitally in a way that would feel like, as I said, you would be in the archives and seeing the first time. And I think there's something about that. You're right, that method of presentation of like a box full of things that, you'll go through in order. Maybe you'll skip a few things, you'll come back. One's a different shape, one's a different color, one smells different. There's a lot of variety. Has been an inspiration to me. And I think after working on the first couple of installments of MoMA, I think that did refine my sense of what I wanted to do with the magazine. And I've never honestly thought about that before, but I think it's absolutely accurate. So thank you for that question.
Well, thank you. It's such a blast. It's so fun. Thanks.
Thank you. Anybody else?
While we wait, I can just add on a funny anecdote, which is I do love, the box and the potential of the explosion of the ideas and the contents within. When I was speaking about Exhibition X, that show that never happened, what I like about that is talk about like an explosive concept, and it literally is in just one box. Like all the documentation fits in one tiny little box. Now, separately, what I'll tell you is I appreciate that you focused on that image with all the boxes lined up all orderly. I can tell you that Todd would walk into my stacks, and he would find like the one shelf where things were not perfect. And he'd say, we're going to shoot that, or like a an old binder with things sticking out and rough edges and bad preservation. And I was like, over my dead body, are you photographing that and publishing it? And I can see from the participants, there are a couple archivists on the call, so you know exactly what I'm talking about.
Takes a particular kind of personality to be an archivist. You have
But
to be
he was
organized.
drawn to it. He could just sniff it out. So
It's true. Disorder among order is very interesting. Then another very sweet comment from Leah. What an inspiration this book is to those of us stewarding artist archives. Thank you, Leah. That's a very sweet thing for you to say.
yes, thank you.
Well,
One more question,
good, perfect, David.
if you can find me.
I
Yeah.
found you.
I see you.
Okay, cool. So I was an early adopter. I don't know if my name rings a bell, Todd. I was an Esopus early adopter.
Sure does.
Issue 1, issue 2. We chatted way back when.
Mhm.
One of the things that's interesting is I get the sense that probably a lot of people on this call are also collectors of our own ephemera and other ephemera because we value it so much. And it just brings up the question, what are these things worth? Not talking about money, but like what drives the value of notes and letters and collected pieces that make up a life? Like, how do you guys think about that in terms of why are we interested in this? I guess is what I'm trying to say. What drives our human interest in these things?
That's a great. I'll start if you don't mind, Michelle.
Go ahead.
That's another really great question. I think I always think of reading history versus reading a documentation, letters. You can read the historical record, that is pulled from all these various primary source materials, or you can read the primary source materials. And while the other is, or the first is certainly necessary and important, I always feel like we connect better with, not to sound whatever, but our humanity when we're looking at someone's handwriting or someone's personal letter that's been folded and creased and maybe is stained or has the ink from one side bleeding into the other side. And I feel like maybe the value in archival objects lies in that fact that it's a way to connect directly to people, who have done things and said things and thought things in a way that you can't deny it. You can't deny that connection. So to me, that's always been the value of, whether it's a letter from my grandmother that I discovered in the attic or, an amazing memo from Alfred Barr to, Dorothy Miller. That always strikes me as being very valuable. Now more than ever, really.
Yeah. Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I think it reveals process. It reveals an individual's human touch. And it also shows you that things are messy and they were always, the sands are always shifting. Whereas when history gets written, it becomes sort of, solidified and there's always another way to interpret. And that's why I like going back to the original sources to see how oneself might think about that versus just digesting what someone else has told you is, the truth or the history.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and process, like just understanding, having a glimpse into someone's process, whether it's their thinking process, their creative process, is always so exciting and inspiring. Here's a great question from Neil Goldberg, the artist, former Esopus contributor. Okay, you ready, Michelle? How do you deal with material you may have encountered that revealed challenging or problematic aspects of MoMA's history? That's a good one.
We research it and try to share it out.
Yeah, we've had some problematic things and various issues related to archival material.
Which one are you thinking of, Todd?
I have to go back. There are letters that are kind of problematic from.
Oh, how about the time we gave Mussolini a
Right.
leather-bound photo album because It was under his regime that we got the Italian Renaissance masterpieces.
There you go.
And they wanted
What was
to,
that?
they wanted to give a medal to Alfred Barr and Nelson Rockefeller, and Barr demurred, saying, we can not accept any honorifics from this regime. So, you know, that's a good example. Outside of this project, I can say that MoMA brought on a consulting curator who spent 4 years researching in our archives to discover and, you know, sort of establish and publish out the history of MoMA's involvement and, you know, the acquisitions, exhibitions of Black artists. And MoMA itself published that this monograph on this history. And, you know, whereas there were some great moments of MoMA, you know, exhibiting great artists, the publication very frankly calls out the shortcomings and the mistakes that the museum has made through the decades.
Wow, more questions. Okay, if you could do one more episode of Modern Artifacts, what would be the topic? Ooh. You always wanted to do information.
What's that?
You always wanted to do one an installment based on the information exhibition. That would have been fantastic.
Yeah, that would have been one. There's so many, it's hard to choose. And that's from my husband. I can't believe he put me on the spot like that. Jeffrey, I'm gonna get you over dinner.
Here's something from Catherine Kraft from the Nasher. Thanks, Todd and Michelle. Love the Renee Darnacourt drawings, I think, in issue 4. Michelle, were you already working on a book about him when Esopus featured him, or did that inspire your project?
No, I was not working on the book. So having the opportunity to publish this article in Esopus with Todd sort of started the fire. And it was just amazing. So the book did come later. That other book also took me, what, 6 years or something. So the beauty of archives, there's a lot to dig into. And also, I just have to say how much I love Michael Rakowitz's work. And I know you're intimately involved. I saw the conversation you all did recently. So it's amazing. And it's been great to have Michael be a part of this project as well.
Yeah.
That's an incredible project, and but also those as a curator, I could only ever aspire to making drawings for my exhibitions the way that Renee Darnacourt did.
Thank you, Catherine.
Thank you.
Okay, we've got one from Esopus, which I assume is from our esteemed administrator, Carrie Ann.
It was one from Jen Bervin that got.
Oh, nice. Oh, okay. Have any exhibitions spun off of Exhibition X? That's a great question. I don't think so. There's
No.
an exhibition about it at this point.
Yes, no, nothing has happened. I mean, this article, I think, is the most in-depth, you know, public exposure it's ever seen. It has been referenced in a few other scholarly works, but no exhibition. I can tell you, Mickey Wolfson was visiting once, and it was shortly after the Esopus article came out. And so I brought out the magazine and I showed it to him, and he was like, oh, we must restage it down in Florida at his institution. So I was, you know, I was hoping, I thought he was kind of teasing for a while, but no, it never came to be.
Okay, one from Jenny Adam. How to educate the next generation of art public who are more and more losing touch with the materiality of physical art pieces, artist books, and artifacts, and more. Oof. Yeah, that's a tough one. It's you know, it's expensive. First of all, it's cumbersome, as I was saying earlier, to bring, you know, materials to people who may not have easy access to them. That was one of the main goals of Esopus, was to get these magazines in the hands of people who weren't in New York City or in LA or in Paris or wherever. But it's not easy. And I think a lot of material doesn't, reach broad swaths of the public because of that. And I guess the advantage of the internet and web-based services is that they can get to everyone or almost everyone. But I think you're right, Jenny. I think if you don't have that materiality, as I was saying earlier, I think you do lose that resonance and that visceral relationship to these materials, which are really important, really significant. I don't know, Michelle, what do you think?
No, it's a great question. It's very challenging. One thing I could say, as far as trying to do, I'm talking very small scale, right? Micro in my world here, is trying to do events like the image I showed you, to invite artists into the archives, to do sort of these smaller scale so people can have a little more intimate connection. We even find this challenging when we think about wanting to exhibit archives or artist books, even here at the Museum of Modern Art, because once you put them in the galleries, they have to be under a vitrine. So, all of a sudden you have a book, but if you can't flip through it, then, that's also very difficult. So,
It's a tough
Jenny,
one.
I think
challenges.
I know you've thought about this a lot. Maybe you can lead us
Please.
give us the path forward.
Yes,
No,
give
I
it
think
your
it's
insight.
utterly frustrating. I think anyone who are parents, right? I mean, we raising children who doesn't read books. I mean, digital books means too, but it's just never the same. And a lot of artists themselves, they don't even know sometimes artist books exist too, because these artists, they just become so, born digital generations. So I think it's an ongoing challenge as we are in between generation, I think, because we grew up reading books and making art with, all these tactile sensations that are so normal, and we cherish those moments. And yet now more generations, I think, feeling this earth is not. I think we are, sort of minority group becoming more and more so.
Well, and also, it makes me think, when I started Esopus, everybody, this was 2003, and everybody, all my friends and colleagues and everyone else, it was just the beginning of the internet sort of taking over,
right.
mass market publications. And I said, you're crazy. Nobody wants to read a magazine anymore.
Right.
That's insane. What are you thinking? And then within like 5 years, everyone was saying, what a brilliant move to, like, I didn't really have any, it wasn't brilliant or crazy. I just think it was an idea to do something a little different. And, there was this explosion of small press publications and artist books to a certain degree, but mostly small press magazines, with very specialized topics and interests. But, those are, the problem is always that they're not cheap often, and they're limited in their distribution and scope. So you end up creating like a boutique, a market for these beautiful objects that are still not doing what you so rightly say they should do, which is educate the general public. So that's a problem. I think it's just a means of production issue. I mean, if you, it's expensive to print something, to distribute it, to get it, and then to get to a library or a museum to see it. It's a lot of efforts, but I'm sure there's got to be, there have to be ways. So Jenny, we're counting on you.
Yes, we all have to work hard on that, I think.
True. It's true. Okay. Two kind of related questions. Lexa Walsh asked, do you print your digital archives? It is common knowledge that physical archives will last longer. I too worry about the loss of material culture. And then kind of related, Deborah Wife asks, are there any plans to digitize the magazine and the book, even though that format wouldn't work 100%? So I'll answer the first one, and then you can answer, Michelle, and I'll answer the second one.
Sure.
Actually, you really should just answer the first one because
Okay, I'm happy to jump in.
I don't have any digital archives.
Yeah, so from the MoMA institutional perspective, today, no, we do not print digital archives, and that's why we're using this very trusted digital repository, which can ensure long-term preservation of digital assets. But I do want to tell you a funny story, which is in the 1990s, as we turned to, using desktop computers in the business place, and then increasingly email for communication, all of a sudden, like the volume of records was expanding so dramatically. And at that point, there were no, at least in, the private sector, nonprofit sector, there were no great preservation systems. So all in the 90s and early 2000s, we said, you need to print everything, every email, every document that you're creating in Microsoft Word, et cetera. And I have to tell you, we just finished a project to process MoMA's exhibition records from 1929 to the year 2000, the date range. The records dating from 1929 to 1989 were exactly equal in volume to the paper records for the one decade of the 1990s.
Wow.
So it's just an explosion of paper, but that arc is over, and now we'll be on the decline because everything will be captured electronically.
Mhm.
So Tod, you want to take the magazine?
Yeah, I will. So, the problem, Deborah, is that I have an issue here. It's very, very hard to turn things like, let me find an example, like fold outs, something like this, for instance, that folds out, or inserts that come out of the magazine, CDs, etc., which are all very physical things. This is a folder that actually has a script. I don't know if you can see it. It's actually removable. So what happens is I thought about it, and we've done digitizing of certain articles, particularly fiction, and some of the critical nonfiction that we've published, but it doesn't really, maybe I have to rethink it based on what I just said earlier about a boutique publishing and things not being available enough. But I think what we would probably do more likely would be to take the written contributions. We have quite a few, whether it's fiction or criticism or reflections or whatever, and possibly publish them in some sort of digital collection. But as far as trying to reproduce the flow of the magazine, it's an absolutely useless, futile exercise, as much as I would love to be able to do it. Does that answer your question? I'm going to take that as a yes. Any other questions? What a great conversation. Okay, good. Well, I want to thank you all for being here tonight. It was a pleasure to talk with Michelle, as always, and to reflect on our collaboration together. If anybody doesn't have a copy of the book, you can find it at our web store, which is esopus.org, and just go to the buy. I can't even remember, Carrie Ann, what the link is. And there is, I think, if anyone hasn't gotten the issue yet, there is a discount code for anybody who's here tonight. And Carrie Ann, do you remember what is it? MoMA? Are you going to put it in the chat?
MoMA Zoom, and I will put it in the chat.
Yeah, it's going to be in the chat. So please, if anybody doesn't have a copy and would like one, get a deal tonight only. And regardless, thank you all for being here. I hope we can all convene in person very soon, maybe even to celebrate the book at some point. But in the meantime, please all take care, and thank you for being here.
Yes, thank you to you all the way from the West Coast to Europe. So I see
Mhm.
someone who's up very, very late right now, so go to bed. Great to see you all. Thank you to everyone for all your support, and thank you, Todd, for making the magic happen.
Thank you for making the magic to make the magic happen. Bye.
Good night.